special at the races when Andy Beyer joins the conversation. And if we're going to have a speed figure discussion, there's really an incomplete session if Andy Beyer's not a part of it. We say good evening to Andy.
Hey, Steve, how are you?
Andy, terrific. Jeremy Plonk with us as well.
Hi, Jeremy.
Good to be with you again, Andy. We did this a year ago. We did the sit-down, long-form interview with you. Tonight we get you to interact with the fans a little bit later. But first, we want to talk to you a little bit about the figures. The Triple Crown just wound down. And give us, from a figure maker standpoint, your impressions of the three races here at this year's Triple Crown.
Well, I would, looking back on the whole series, this was a sequence of races where the figures turned out not to be that important. This Triple Crown was all about trips and pace, and I think for somebody, somebody kind of learning the game, or a fledgling student at night school, these were races to really examine and think about in order to and appreciate just how much the dynamics of the way a race is run, affects the outcome. I mean, we saw a giant pace in the Derby take a toll on all the speed horses and allow the race to be dominated by horses coming from off the pace. And then we had quite a different scenario in the Preakness. And people, all racing fans kind of get caught up in who won and who lost, and the winner is a superstar. But you look back on the Kentucky Derby, and the horses who finished 1, 2, 3 did it because they were just beneficiaries of the right trip. They weren't that good.
Andy, as a follow-up to that, I got to ask, and I don't want to get too far afield, but one of the things that we're having a little bit of trouble interpreting, I had Andy Serling this morning on the show, and he also discussed this with Shug and with Todd Pletcher the last couple of days, and Mike Smith today. When you have a race like the Belmont going 12 furlongs and the first 6 are run in just under 111, this race collapsed, and yet none of the closers were able to impact the race significantly. Orb at least made up 7 lengths in the second half of the race, but it was to no avail. I mean, is it a case where most horses just did not run, and that only the winner and runner-up really ran any kind of race?
I would say it's obviously it was a very puzzling race, but I think the explanation is simply that there are no mile-and-a-half horses in America anymore. Once they hit the top of the stretch, everybody was just running on fumes and nobody could close. I mean, Orb's performance was just unimaginably bad. I mean, he at the top of the stretch, it looked like he was supposed to win by 5. But, I mean, nobody accelerated. The speed horses collapsed, and nobody could catch him. And I think that, we've seen that certainly Orb and some of the others are better than they showed in the Belmont, but I think I see that as all a function of the distance.
Well, let's go the distance in terms of a discussion of the figs, and give everyone who has not had the opportunity to hear you on at the races when you visit, and we've had the talk, or if they haven't watched the long-form video from last year, give everybody a thumbnail sketch of how figures are derived, what your interest in this was initially, and how the Beyer figures came to be.
Well, they came to be because the great passion and goal of my young life was to be a successful horse player somehow. And I wandered down a lot of blind alleys in my youth, and then kind of just experimented with with an analysis of the final times of races. And this was not a wholly unique thing to me. I mean, there had been speed handicappers in the 40s and 50s, and some people had written a little bit about the subject. But when I started just dabbling with figures, it was a revelation. I saw that this is how you evaluate horses' performances. And obviously the game has a lot of complexities. There are lots of things, as we saw in this Triple Crown series, that determine the outcome of races. But how fast the horse runs is the number one factor. And in our calculations, just I don't want to give you a long dissertation. The figure is a product of two factors. I mean, we look at the final time, and we make a calculation that measures the inherent speed of the racetrack, we have methods that let us compare times at different distances and translate every time into a number that lets you have comparable numbers for easy calculation that for the last 20 years everybody has seen in the daily racing form. The higher the figure, the better, and that's a very simplified version. I mean, we have over the years have had a lot of refinements that the computer age has made possible. And I think that our numbers are as good as anybody could possibly make them.
On that topic, I would love for you to explain to people that the occasions where you revisit a figure and you knew going into making a day's number on a quirky day where weather may have factored in, where drying out track may have resulted in the splitting of the variant. Give us the explanation so people understand the motivation to get the number right.
Right. Well, there are days when we do the figures, and the and the final result does not look cut and dried. We will frequently look at the data and be uncertain about a race or about part of a card. I mean, let's say we have a day where the track slows down toward the end of the day. And there's maybe no doubt about that, but we have fast races early, slow races late. But in the middle, we might not be sure whether a race was properly considered to be in the fast part of the card or the slow part of the card. And we're not God, and nobody at any racetrack posts a sign saying the track is changing after the fifth race. And so when we have ambiguous situations, we monitor how the horses run in their subsequent starts. And if we see horses coming out of a race and they're all running higher figures than they did in the race in question, we'll say, gee, we may have, we may have been low on this, and we'll go back and revisit it and change it. So, I mean, there's no sort of illicit motives or anything here. We always acknowledge that there's sometimes, the first time we may not have all the data or all the information we need, to be totally certain about a figure, and when we're proved wrong, we'll go back and change it.
Similarly, I see a question on the applet from Howard in Oklahoma City, and he's asking for you to give us a response to races with extreme pace scenarios and how that occasionally gets factored in, where you've had this ridiculous fast pace and an utter collapse, for instance.
Well, when the pace is really fast, horses will slow down at the end, and in general, they'll just run, or a field will run pretty much what it was supposed to run, regardless. The situations where pace really confuses the figures is when the pace is so extremely slow that a horse who is even if he's in top form, will not be able to accelerate enough to run as fast as he is capable of, because of a super slow pace. If you have a race where they go the half in 52 in a route race, or 6 furlongs in 1:18, and the final time is going to come up unrealistically slow, and this is usually not much of an issue on dirt, but it certainly is on turf and on synthetics, and so in those cases we will often make an arbitrary adjustment to assign the race a number that just better reflects the ability of the horses. That's the ultimate goal, is to have a number that means something and says how good are these horses, and if the true figure is something that is just going to be totally absurd and meaningless, it's not going to be of use to anyone. So in the slow pace race situations, we will take some liberties.
Andy, we've got fan questions coming in asking about matching up the numbers in inexact comparisons. When you've got two horses have a 98, but they're switching surfaces. One got it on turf, one got it on dirt. Or one was going long and the other horse was going short. Does 98 beat 97 no matter what? Or how do you differentiate?
Certainly. I think we all know by now, or we all should know after one or two lessons of night school, that races on different surfaces are just different. I mean, horses have different capabilities on dirt, synthetic, and grass, and it's a very rare horse like Wise Dan who's adept on all of them, and so when a horse has been running on a different surface from today's race, I will always look back to his most recent performances on today's surface. Mm-hmm. As for distance, we know horses have, all horses have preferences for different distances, and a 6 furlong figure is not necessarily going to translate into the same performance at a mile or a mile and an eighth. What the figures tell you is when you're comparing widely different distances, is the just kind of the level of performance at that distance. A figure of 90 at going 6 furlongs is a comparable effort, class-wise, to a figure of 90 going a mile and an eighth. But it doesn't mean a horse is magically going to duplicate his performance at the different distances.
What about the bounce theory? We hear that with the performance figure makers, the sheets, the Ragazine, the Thorograph. One of our night schoolers here is asking you here, Bob, was the I'm trying to see who else had that question here. It was Jim Clark in Toronto had the question about the bounce theory. Do you subscribe to it? And if so,
no, I don't.
Okay.
I mean, I understand and I guess respect the concept that if a horse has an extremely tough, rigorous, gut-wrenching effort, and now comes back on short rest, maybe he's going to his performance is going to decline. But the people who use figures to arrive at predictions of a bounce, I don't think necessarily that just running a fast race dictates that the horse is going to bounce. I mean, when horses run atypically huge numbers, it is often because they get the right trip, the right pace setup. Maybe they have a bias in their favor, and then when they come back and run again under normal circumstances, they're going to run less well. You look at Oxbow. I mean, he got to the lead in that grueling Kentucky Derby pace, and he was up the track with a figure of 90, and then he gets loose with no pressure in the Preakness, and he runs 106. I mean, I wouldn't say that the Preakness was any more of a rigorous race for Oxbow, probably even less so. Just because he ran a higher number. So I think that those explosive races are most of the time a reflection of just the circumstances of the race. Not that a horse just ran his guts out and is now going to be tired for the next month, as the sheep guys would tell you.
Andy, one of the interesting points early, I don't want to let it get too far buried here on the list of questions. In terms of the familiarity of the public now with figs, and particularly with the advent of the availability of Beyer Speed Figures with the daily racing form PPs, are the figs as valuable as a handicapping tool as they were early on before people really understood what they were looking at?
Oh no! I mean, back in the old days when you could get a $50 mutual on a horse with the top figure, I mean that was a gambler's heaven, but the availability of figures from so many different sources now means you're not going to get a big price on a horse with a standout last race number. But speed figures are such a crucial factor that you have to take them into account and use them. I mean, even if you don't call yourself a speed handicapper, or if that's not your major point of reference as a handicapper, I find that the better use of them, rather than looking for that standout number, is a case where you've got two or three horses in a field who are maybe relatively even on the figures, but one of them earned that number with a difficult trip. The others, had neutral or easy trips. And so even though you've got, say, 3 horses with approximately a 90 each, you would say, that horse who earned the 90 under more difficult circumstances is a real standout over over the horses with a similar number. But there's no easy money with figure standouts anymore.
Well, the other element, though, that still I think does exist for those that are conscientious in this regard is the pattern, and recognizing nuance in using Beyers continues to be fruitful. I mean, I will at a glance, see a horse that is inching forward, making small incremental gains. A lot of times, if there's some other factors that you can fold in, you can anticipate a quantum leap forward. You had a question earlier, Andy, as well, from somebody asking about horses that are alternating, running a 78, then a mid 80s, then back to the mid, to low, let's say the mid 70s. You start to see good race, bad race patterns. Those become very apparent.
I don't believe that most horses have have some sort of a built-in pattern, as you would describe. I don't think that a given horse is somehow programmed to run good race, bad race. I think that in the majority of circumstances, when you see figures that are, or a horse whose figures change from race to race, it's as much about the dynamics of the race and how the trip and the circumstances of the whole race affected him, rather than necessarily fluctuations in his physical condition. Obviously, horses, particularly the cheapies, do fluctuate a lot in their physical condition, but I don't think that you can necessarily predict that just by looking at numbers on a page.
Andy, we've got a question from Ryan in Pittsburgh, and he wants to know, this is a good specific question, how much do you look at the speed figures with 2-year-olds, and do you expect those to jump all over the place with a first-time starter making their second start? Do you see inconsistency among 2-year-olds, and how much can you rely on their numbers?
Well, yes, the numbers are very important, but you also have to expect that lightly raced horses, can certainly jump up to a great degree, from one race to another. I mean, it is not shocking to see a horse run 60 in his first start and 80 in his second start. I think part of the elements that go into that are not only the just natural improvement of the horse, but also just the MO of his trainer. That certain guys will have a horse revved up the first time out, and others won't. I mean, you'd look at very different dynamics, say with a Wesley Ward horse and a Shug McGahee horse. Wesley is going to be firing his best shot first time out, and Shug may take 5 races to get there. So again, it's not necessarily always the horse, but his trainer as well. And I should note, when you're looking at younger horses, too, a handicapper should remember that horses just improve with age. I mean, my rule of thumb has been that up until like the start of a horse's 4-year-old season, they will just naturally improve like a point to a point and a half a month. I mean, if you could generalize about it. So if you're looking at a horse in a race for 3-year-olds who maybe has been laid off and have run figures that don't look all that competitive based on his 2-year-old form, there's often going to be a big natural improvement. So you always have to keep in mind the aging factor when you're looking at younger horses.
Andy, quick question from my pal Joe Christopek in the chat. He wants to know, there's a $300,000 carryover in the high five tomorrow at Arlington. Are you working on it?
No, well, that's one of the that I just detest these jackpot bets. I think as I've written a couple times about the Rainbow Six at Gulfstream, which started this, that it was just the worst sucker bet out there, because when in many cases when you get a good size carryover like that, and the race or races involved are not all that competitive, it's virtually impossible for anybody to hit it. And so the players who are betting that day are not only paying the normal takeout rate, but whatever, a 40 or 50% that's coming off the top that's going into the jackpot. So it's really a bad bet.
Well, Andy, it's always a great bet that will be fascinated and appreciative of your visits. Looking forward to getting you up to Saratoga this summer. As always, a real pleasure.